in this video we're going to look at how to do a little flowchart in Inkscape. This is something that I think everyone will have probably at least one of in their scriptsy or thesis or dissertation. You can see I've got the on-screen keyboard here from Windows. This is just so that you can see if I press buttons. Inkscape's got a lot of handy shortcuts that you can use the keyboard for, so I want you to be able to see them, and it makes it a lot easier for you as well. So I've just got a new document here, and you can see that I've got the a page size. I'm just going to close here. So this is what yours should look like. You can see that you should have a page, and this is obviously an A4 page size. So what you do here relative to the rest of your document, that's how it'll come up in your thesis, so you can use it as a guideline. So the first little handy shortcut is if you hold in Control and then you scroll on the mouse wheel, you zoom in and out. That makes life a lot easier. And then Shift and scroll moves from side to side for navigation. So that's quite nifty, and you can get your page in the center. Okay, so the first thing we need is a rectangle. We're going to create a flowchart just with a rectangle and arrows linking it. So this is the rectangle tool over here, and you just left click and drag and bring it out to whatever size you like. Okay, now Inkscape usually keeps track of the last setting that you had. I just want to move this up so I can see my color bar. The last setting that you had, so I obviously made a fully black rectangle, and there are two aspects of elements in Inkscape: the fill and the stroke. The fill refers to the color, the fill color of your object, and the stroke refers to the line color. So if you go object over here and you open fill and stroke, you'll see it pop up in this panel, and I like to keep this open because you're basically always using fill and stroke, so it's quite nifty. So if you want to change the fill color of an object, there's a couple of ways to do it. Over here you can see the different types of fill. So if you want no fill, then you would obviously click there. That's a solid fill, then a gradient fill, or linear gradient, radial gradient, and then all the way to pattern fill. And some of these are quite useful, but for now we'll just talk about the plain flat color fill. You can use the RGB system or any of these. I quite like the wheel. It's nice and easy. So you can see here it's a color wheel, and if I click here on the extreme corner, then I'll get whatever color the wheel is on, and it changes the fill of my object. If I want black or white, then you just click out here towards the corner, the corner away from the white line. That's the white one, and that is black. So let's say another easy way to look at the color of your square is down here in the bottom bar. You can see the fill is specified as black and the stroke is specified as none. So there is no stroke color, and if you go here to stroke paint, you'll see that the cross is selected for no paint. So if you want a stroke, then you click here on the flat color, and you can see it got a little bit wider, and now we can see our stroke color is black and the thickness of our line is also given over there. So a quick way to change the fill is just to come along here and click a color, for example a white fill or a red or something like that. Let's go for white now because we're going to make a flow diagram. And if you want a quick way to change the stroke color, then hold in Shift and select the color that you want, and that'll change the line color. So for now we want a black line because we're making a flow diagram. Then we're going to look quickly at stroke style. So over here, stroke style gives you the width of your line, so obviously a thicker line or a thinner line depending on the application. And you can also have things like dashes or dots or whatever. It doesn't show so well on the black, but you should see it quite clearly. And then markers, which we'll get to in a second. So traditionally, I think the size that works well is 0.8. Works well for lines relative to the text width. So that's about the size of the line you want. Now you'll notice if I grab one of these corners to resize the box, the width of the line changes. That's because this is currently a shape. And so the shape scales accordingly. The bigger I make it, the bigger the width of the line. So it's scaling everything as I'm dragging it to a certain point. So I'm going to reset that at 0.8. So you can override it. For example, a big rectangle like that, I can still make the line width 0.8 and it'll keep it the same size. But then if anything I change, the width will change. The way to be able to change the size of the rectangle without changing the width is to go to this edit paths by nodes. And here you can see the rectangle has two nodes. It's these two corners that specify its location. if you edit the nodes, it doesn't consider it as a shape, it considers it just as a line. So it preserves all the elements of the line and it simply moves the node. So now I can click and drag this node and you can see that the width of my line hasn't changed, but the size of my text box has changed. So that's how I can change the shape of my rectangle without changing the fixed width that I want to keep it at 0.8 pt so it looks right relative to my text. This little circle, in case you're wondering, is to give rounded edges to your text box. There may be application for that, but I would recommend sharp corners for use in your flow diagrams. So there we have a text box, and now we want to put an arrow coming out of the bottom of it. So a Bezier pin is the easiest way to draw a straight line. So you just select this pin, and I'll just go do it over here. So I'm going to click left click, and I'm going to go down, and I want to finish with a left click and then right click to finish the line. So if you check, this line is very thin now, and you can see by the width as well. So let's make it 0.8. So now it's the same width as this line. The reason the Bezier pin requires so many clicks is because you can also use it to draw a shape. So for example, if I select the Bezier pin and then I left click and then I left click and left click and left click and left click to make a shape, and then I right click to finish the line. So I can get lines of all different types over here. And then each one of these points that I clicked is a node. And then if I want to move or edit a certain node, then I can just do it like that. And I can get whatever shape I like. I can also delete nodes and the lines will blend, but then you see that you start to introduce things like curves. So there's a lot to experiment with, but I'm not going to cover it all now. I'm just going to delete that. Also, what you'll notice is when you draw the line, it's kind of hard to keep it, make sure it's straight. And a nifty trick is to hold in Control, and this fixes the line to sort of preset increments of angles, which makes it a lot easier to draw. So if you hold Control, it's quite easy to draw a straight line like that. Left click, right click to finish, and then resize the width. So I'm going to just delete this line, and this is then going to be an arrow. So if you click this line, it's a stroke, obviously. Stroke paint is black, that's cool. We could also change it here by holding shift and clicking, but let's hold shift and click to black. Stroke style over here, we don't want any dashes or anything, but we want a marker. So this is the front marker, so that's what will be at the first node that we drew. This is a middle marker, so in that previous line that I drew that had a lot of nodes, I can put a marker on each of those nodes. I could put, for example, a circle or something like that indicating each node. And then this is going to be at the end marker. So here, I'm going to select an arrowhead. There's a couple of arrowheads. You can choose whichever one you like. I like this sort of slightly blunt one. And now we want this arrow to be here at the midpoint of this rectangle. But it's a pain to go out and measure it and figure it all out. So there's two options here. One is the snap function. So you'll be familiar with snap from when you used CAD back in the day probably. And you can see that this automatically snaps to corners and midpoints of line segments. So if you then click on this and drag it, it should try snap. But you can see that's not in the middle because there are a lot of different points that could get snapped to, and it's a little bit unstable. So it's maybe not the best way to go. So I would turn snap off over here. You can see that they're all blurred out, so they're not on snap function anymore. And then rather go to object, align and distribute, and then this should pop up and you're close to your fill and stroke table. Now the easiest way I think to do this is just to align them relative to one another. So you'll see the alignment is relative to over here, and you can choose whatever you like. I typically go for first selected. So that means whatever you click first, you're going to align, that's going to be the anchor, and you're going to align the object you select second to that anchor. So the way you do it is you click the object, you hold shift, and then you click the second object, and then you choose your alignment. So in this case, we want them to be aligned on the central vertical axis, like that, which is great. And then we would like the bottom of this arrow to be, or the top of this arrow in this case, to be at the bottom of this rectangle. So if you look at this one, you'll see that the yellow box is treated as the anchor, and the rest is treated as what's going to move. So that's the one we want. So the rectangle will be the anchor, and the arrow will move up to the back of the arrow will touch the bottom of the rectangle. And we can zoom in and check. Now this is another thing that you should be aware of. Obviously you can't really see this on a normal A4 page, but it depends how meticulous you are. You might not like the fact that it doesn't join. Just want to point out over here under fill and stroke, you specify a stroke style. So we've got a join style and we've got a cap style. If I change the cap style, you'll see the gap is even bigger, or you can have a long sort of cap and then it literally just about makes contact. I quite like the round one because it often looks neater, especially on the joins. So what I do in this case is I just hold Control and then I click on this and drag it up until it intersects nicely with the rectangle. So just manually edit it over there, and then it's neat and tidy and it's joined. And now you have a box with an arrow coming out of it, and all that's left is to add some text. So text is down here, the A. You click on the A and you draw yourself a text box just to write in, and then let's put some text for box number 1. Okay, and this text is completely randomly edited from a previous version, so I'm just going to click in it. I want to go Control A to select all the text. Then I can change the font, so you should have loaded CMU, and CMU serif is the font that comes out in your scriptsy or your thesis. So I would choose that one. You want medium, not bold or italic. And text wise, I think the document uses 11 pt. So use 11 and then you know that that's the size of the text relative to all the other text. But now it looks funny. You can see that it's got a thick border and it's got no fill. So what we do there is we choose a black fill. So we just click on black to fill in the text. Okay, hold on, you have to click out of it. So it's treated as a shape. This is when you're in the text editor. This is when you're editing it as a shape. So while it's a shape, we click on black to fill it. Okay, this is another error that I may as well point out now. Fill and stroke often has this attribute over here, which is kind of like the opacity fill or something. So you need to make sure that if you're having errors filling things, the reason is because of this. You need this to actually be on black. Here it's saying it fills it with the color, but it doesn't show any of the color. So if you saw down there, that's a classic error that you sometimes get. It's giving some funny function over there for whatever reason. Then you know to go into fill, go to the RGB and drag this A value all the way up to the top. It should be at 255 always. So now we have our black filled text, and we don't actually want a stroke, we just want the fill. So we hold shift and click there, and then your text looks nice and normal. Okay, so what if you don't want all your text on one line? Well, there's two ways to go about it. You can either manually press enter to shift your text down, but this blue box represents the bounding box for text. So if I drag the blue box to make it a bit smaller, you'll see eventually the text is forced to bump. Okay, we're getting a little bit of an error here. Let me just... I'll explain what I did now. So the blue box represents the bounding of the text. So if I click this node and I drag the blue box, you'll see eventually the text becomes too wide for the bounding box and it automatically gets bumped onto the next line. So you can do it like that. And then it'll always shift relative to how big the bounding box is. Obviously the other way to do it is just to go in there and press enter. And then that's a fixed space always, but I guess it's your preference. So you can make the bounding box, let's say make it that big. You'll see if I make the bounding box too small, it goes red. It means that not all the text is currently being shown in the bounding box. So just make sure it's blue, so you're seeing all the text, and that looks about right. Now we would like this text to be aligned to this box. So we go back to our selector so we can treat this as a shape, and we take the first selected, hold shift, second selected, align and distribute, central axis, central horizontal axis, central vertical axis, so that it's in the middle. And that is about it. If you think that your text box is maybe a bit big, then remember you can edit it. So maybe our text box would have looked better like that. But now we need to reformat it. So we liked where the text was select the text first, shift, and then the box. Now it's going to align the box relative to the text. And we know that this was in the middle. So let's just zoom in, hold control, and drag it upwards until it intersects the box nicely. Let's just double check that that's aligned. There we go, horizontally. Okay, so then what I always like to do is group the text and the box together. So Control G, or you can just right click group, and then this is going to move as a unit. Control Z is undo. And then what's easiest to do is actually just to select these two items and press Control D, and that's duplicate, and it's now created a duplicate of this whole thing that I selected directly on top of the previous one. So, and it's selecting the top level currently. So if I hold Control and I drag this top selected one, you'll see that I can move it horizontally and I won't have to align it again. Obviously you can just align and distribute if I need to, but it's a nice, quick and easy way to make a second box. And then I want to edit the text. So I click into the text editor because I actually want to edit the content of the text. Control A to select it all and say this is. Now you can see what I was saying about the bounding box is too small to house all this text. So I need to make the bounding box ever so slightly bigger. I can choose how I want to make it bigger. Let's say I want to make it like that. So if I can just go back, you'll see that this text was automatically aligning itself because the text box is aligned with the rectangle. The text was automatically staying in the middle. But now when I change the bounding box, I lose that functionality because now these two shapes are no longer the same. So what I need to do now is go in here and ungroup these items. That's the text in the box, and then realign them relative to the box. And I would like to group them again. So that's quite easy. And then if I just duplicate this and drag it down, perhaps it's just a 3-step. I'm holding Control always when I'm moving to make sure that it's planar movement makes it nice and easy. Then the last thing that I'll show you is perhaps you would want an arrow to point back up to another text box. So you can use the Bezier Pin, like I said, and I suppose you could use the snap function if you wanted, and if you're nice and careful, you can see a handle to line midpoint. That means it's snapping directly to that midpoint. Hold Control to get a nice, sorry, I'm zooming out, that's why it's freaking out a little bit. Rolling the mouse, now I'm holding Control and moving out a little bit, left clicking, moving up, left click, move to the point. See, now you see it says handle to path, which means it's not actually snapping to the midpoint. So if I let go of Control, that's where the midpoint is. So this is why I don't always like to do this way, because now, so I left click and right click to finish the line. But now if I go here, you'll see that that line is not straight. So you can try and edit it using this node, but there's no real way to make sure that it's right. So you can try eyeball it if you want, but I would advise making sure your graphics are 100% neat and tidy and do all the right things, because you're going to use these in all your presentations and obviously your thesis and stuff going forward. So you may as well put some effort in to make them nice. So an easier way that I find to do it is to just duplicate one of these arrows. So Control D, bring it up here. Then here you've got these quick rotate functions. So I'm going to flip it. Should have flipped it the other way, but let's get there nonetheless. And I want it to point into the center. So there, cusp node lied to midpoint, you know that it's snapped, but you can see that it's overlapping. And the reason for that is the node of the arrow actually sits here just behind the point. So it's not the best way to make sure that the arrow looks correct. So be very careful when you use on snap. I would rather take the snap off. I know it's in the middle now, although I could have double checked by just aligning on the horizontal axis. And then I'm going to click on it and hold Control and just drag it out so that the tip intercepts nicely like that. Now I want the same line to come out of this text box. So I'm just going to duplicate and I'm going to hold Control and drag it all the way down. So I know that it's vertically aligned there. And then if I click this box and align it horizontally, then I get it in the right spot. But now I don't want an arrow coming out of this. So we go to fill and stroke, stroke style. And here at the end, we're going to choose just a straight line. Now, if you zoom in, you'll see, because like I was saying, that node, that's where the arrow node was sitting and it was snapping to the line. So there's usually an arrow going over this whole thing because we duplicated. So I would say, click that node, hold Control and just lengthen it so it intercepts your box nicely. So remember the difference between this is reshaping completely and you can see that things change, whereas this node editor edits the node, the exact nodes, treats it as a line and edits those nodes to stretch it or shrink it or whatever you need. And then we just need a line to join these two. So we'll go to the Bezier Pin, click on that node, and turn snap on here. So I'll snap to that node, and then I'll right click, and then it's done. And here, if you zoom in, you'll see that these are nice, neat little joins, which is great, little elbow joins. If I can just illustrate here. Okay, so this has become one unit, because when I drew that new line, I actually clicked on the actual node. But you can obviously draw, for example, one line like that, and then one line like that, and they aren't actually going to be joined to one another. They're just separate lines, and you group them. If you group them, then they become one unit. But there are two separate lines as shapes that get grouped together. Whereas if you draw a line and then you draw a new line, but you actually click from a node, then you actually build on from the node. So this then forms a single line. So the way to do that is you click on the node tool, you get the nodes up, and then you click on the Bezier Pin, and then you start from one of those nodes. That's how you extend a line, so you keep drawing on it. So that's what I've got in this case. Yeah, that one didn't work. You can see it's two separate lines. That's what happened in this case. So this arrow, this part of the arrow is together, but the top part of the arrow isn't joined because I didn't actually go from the node. You saw that I started here on the node, but this just snapped onto the end of this line. So I select them both like I have currently, and I right click and I say group, and then this becomes one unit. And then, yeah, I would really recommend with flow diagrams that you just duplicate stuff. So I would say duplicate this if you need to use it again. So remember, if you just shrink it like that, it's going to look funny because of you're treating it as a shape, which doesn't always work. So it's better to edit the path. So what I'm doing here is I've held shift and I've selected both nodes, and now I'm just moving this line all the way down using the arrow keys, just to make sure I get it nice and straight. And then what I can go and do is choose this line, click the node, hold Control, and bring it all the way down. And then I get a reshaped arrow without changing the thickness. It's not showing a PT right now because it's a grouped item. So grouped items are not the same as a single line, obviously. But now I can rotate this. I can also mirror it if I would like, horizontally or vertically, to get it to look right. Now you'll see it doesn't look right in this case. So I would personally do it this way. I'd turn off snap first, hold Control, drag it out. Then I would take this line. So I would first Control Shift G to ungroup this because it's really hard to work with it grouped. Control, drag this down. Now remember, if I try to line this and this along the center, it's going to look really funny because the center of this shape is over here. So in this case, it's actually easier probably to use the snap function. Click and drag until you see that cusp node to line midpoint. Then you know you've got those 2 points at the midpoint. Connection looks good. And then I would just lengthen this, hold Control, and cusp node to path. And there you have it. So very useful. You're definitely going to draw some flow diagrams in your thesis. This is the bulk of it that you would need. There's other bits and pieces that I'm sure you can work out for yourself, but I hope it helps, and make high quality flow diagrams because you always use them.